Okay, let's jump right into this explainer with a number that is, quite frankly, staggering. Roughly 50% of all carbon dioxide emissions stem directly from urban activities. Now, when we think of climate change, our minds usually go straight to, massive factories with billowing smokestacks or giant power plants. But the real front lines of the global climate battle, they're actually the streets, the neighborhoods, and the downtowns where we live and work every single day. To put that into perspective, when you combine the transport, commercial, and household sectors, we see that half of our emissions problem, and therefore half of our solution, is located right inside our cities. Industry definitely takes up a big chunk, about 35%. But the cars we drive, the offices we're constantly cooling, and the homes we heat, that makes up a massive 50% of the whole pie. The sheer density of urban living means that the way a city is physically designed literally dictates its carbon footprint. Which brings us to the core puzzle we're exploring today. When a city decides to build a brand new transit line or changes zoning laws to allow taller buildings, how do we actually prove it's helping the climate instead of just, guessing? Because it's super easy to say that adding a bike lane or a new park is green. But multi-million-dollar infrastructure decisions require way more than just good intentions. Policymakers need concrete, mathematical proof that a specific policy will actually reduce greenhouse gases. Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are going to demystify the highly technical, data-driven tools that guide those multi-million-dollar city planning decisions. We're peering behind the curtain to look at what you might call the invisible architecture of climate action. We'll be exploring the incredibly sophisticated frameworks and calculation models that urban planners and governments use to definitively measure, predict, and ultimately shrink our urban carbon footprints. To wrap our heads around these heavy academic models used by policymakers, we've basically chunked them into 4 relatable categories. 1. Visualizing present emissions. 2. Exploring renewable potential. 3. Predicting human behavior. And 4. Engineering the slim city. All right, let's start with category 1, the map makers, visualizing present emissions. Before a city can even think about reducing its carbon output, it has to understand exactly where that carbon is coming from. Now, you're probably used to looking at the standard Google Maps interface, right? Well, that same familiar layout is used through a tool called the Environmental Insights Explorer, or EIE, to calculate specific building and transport emissions down to the neighborhood level. By utilizing anonymized mapping data and some really advanced machine learning algorithms, this tool estimates the energy consumption of individual commercial and residential buildings. It also tracks the flow of traffic, cars, public transit, bicycles, to calculate transportation emissions. Several cities are actually already using this to stop guessing and start aggressively targeting their exact high-emission hotspots for energy efficiency retrofits. Moving right along to Section 2, exploring renewable potential. So once we know where the emissions are, we've got to map out our solutions. Enter the REPOS system, which calculates exactly how much clean energy a specific area can actually generate. The absolutely crucial point here is the meticulous data collection. REPOS doesn't calculate solar potential by just eyeballing it. It multiplies exact building polygons and 500-meter mesh grids by regional power generation coefficients. It literally looks at the actual shapes of roofs, hospitals, schools, single-family homes, and applies a specific mathematical coefficient to determine the viable installation area. It even analyzes land types like abandoned farmland or final disposal sites. By taking that viable area and multiplying it by regional sunlight data, planners get a highly accurate prediction of future solar wattage. And it does a very similar thing for wind power. The system precisely layers on geographic realities, like 80-meter altitude wind speeds, while strictly excluding protected areas like national parks. It divides the entire country into these 500-meter mesh grids. If a grid doesn't meet the minimum wind speed, say 5.5 meters per second for onshore wind, it is immediately excluded. Gone. It also filters out grids that are too far from existing power lines or areas designated as nature reserves. So what you're left with is a highly realistic, totally actionable map of pure wind energy potential that private developers and city planners can actually rely on. Which brings us to Category 3, the simulators, predicting human behavior. Here's the thing. Cities aren't just static maps on a screen. They're alive. Which means we need tools that act like a massive, realistic game of SimCity to predict human behavior. Think of the SCGE, that's the Spatial Computable General Equilibrium Model, as a giant calculating engine. It figures out how building a new road in one city alters factory production and population movement 100 miles away. It bakes in economic concepts like consumer utility and corporate profit maximization. If a new high-speed rail line lowers transportation costs, the SCGE model actually predicts how businesses might relocate for cheaper logistics and how workers might move to completely new towns for better wages, altering the carbon footprint of multiple regions simultaneously. It's essentially the ultimate tool for capturing the economic butterfly effect. Now, when simulating urban growth, planners generally have to choose between two incredibly powerful approaches: the CUE model and the LUT model. The CUE model is all about looking for a final balanced state. It searches for an immediate equilibrium where land prices, housing choices, and travel costs all settle perfectly. On the flip side, the LUT model, which stands for Land Use Transport Interaction, embraces continuous rolling changes. It recognizes that cities are rarely in perfect balance, right? They are messy, evolving organisms where today's traffic jam directly influences tomorrow's housing development. And when you look at the LUT model in action, it's brilliantly continuous. It works in these 5-year cycles. A new railway gets built. Over the next 5 years, that convenience attracts housing. That housing then generates more traffic, which restarts the entire cycle. The model constantly feeds back into itself. Transportation convenience at year 0 dictates where service industries and residents decide to locate by year 5. That new land use pattern then completely rewrites the transportation demand, generating new traffic patterns that become the baseline for the next 5-year cycle. It essentially proves that you can't just build a road and walk away. You have to actively model the decades of cascading behaviors that follow. Interestingly, when these models rigorously evaluate induced traffic, they reveal a fascinating, almost ironic truth. Widening a road often doesn't actually solve traffic. It just changes people's travel destinations. Think about it. If you make driving easier, people don't necessarily drive less. They just choose to drive to a farther grocery store or a more distant shopping mall because the total travel time feels the same. The models track these behavioral shifts, from whether people just change their route to whether they change their destination entirely or even change where they choose to live, all simply because a new transportation link was created. Finally, let's move to part 4, the future: engineering the slim city. All of these insanely complex calculations, the emission maps, the renewable potentials, the massive behavioral simulations, they all ultimately funnel into one overarching goal for modern urban planners: creating what is known as the slim city. This model takes all the data we've just discussed to achieve 3 crucial steps. First, it ensures the city is socially sustainable, meaning communities stay connected and the elderly aren't left isolated in disconnected suburbs. Second, it demands a low environmental impact by intentionally reducing necessary travel distances and promoting green mobility, which is how we cut down that massive 50% urban emission slice. And third, it requires managed growth, or actually even managed shrinkage in areas with declining populations. It ensures the local government purposefully controls the urban form rather than just letting it sprawl out wastefully. So the old saying is definitely true: you cannot manage what you do not measure. From counting the solar potential of a single individual rooftop to predicting the 50-year economic ripple effect of a new train line, data is quite literally the invisible architecture protecting our climate. So as we look forward and think about the neighborhoods we all live in, I want to leave you with a question: what data is drawing the future of your city? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking questions, keep looking at the data, and I'll see you next time.